So tonight we are pleased to have Nancy with us, who will be leading the discussion on Messy Church and her involvement in the Messy Church movement in Canada. And so we'll be privileged to watch the PowerPoint presentation and hear from Nancy. And you'll also have opportunity to make questions or comments by typing them into the chat pod at the bottom left of the screen. And you can do that, as many have already done, by typing in the bar and either clicking the bubble to the right or pressing the Enter key. We will try to respond to as many questions as possible. I think a subject like this always elicits a lot of conversation, so we look forward to that, and we'll certainly do our best to make sure all of your questions are heard. If you could just take a moment, and we have a question. You can type questions and comments at any time, and we will respond to them as we're able. I'll hold those for Nancy, and we'll stop at various points to respond to your question. So any time you think of them is a good time to write it down before you forget. To start off, I invite you to upload, if you haven't already, the two handouts that Nancy has prepared for us. These won't necessarily be referenced directly, but will give you further information to the things we'll discuss tonight. And to do that, just click on one of the PDF files and upload to your computer. If you're unable to finish that now before we start, I will post this again at the close of the webinar. It's partially blocking our PowerPoint presentation, so want to make sure we don't block anything important. We also invite you to fill out a feedback form for tonight's presentation, and you will receive a link to do so following the webinar. The webinar tonight will be 1 hour, and we're pleased to have Nancy with us to speak on the topic of Messy Church. Nancy is an Anglican priest presently serving as assistant priest at St. George's Anglican Church in Georgetown, Ontario. She began the first Messy Church in Canada at St. George's almost 5 years ago. Being a seasoned Messy Church practitioner, she offers the benefit of her experience to others considering Messy Church for their church. She, along with Sue Kalbfleisch, Messy Church Regional Coordinator, has led many Messy Church workshops in Ontario. So welcome, Nancy, and I will turn it over to you. But before I do that, those of you who have very nicely raised your hands for me to indicate that you can hear, you may put your hands down. I'm sure you're getting tired. So to do that, go back to the little icon at the top of the screen. There's to the little arrow beside the figure with the raised hand. And the drop-down menu will give you an option to clear your status. So if you have any concerns technologically, you can type a concern in the chat pod during the webinar, and I'll try to respond to that as well. Anyway, once again, welcome to everyone who's joined us tonight, and welcome to you, Nancy.
It's really great to be able to share this exciting new ministry with people, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. We don't often use the words messy and church together, and in a way that's unfortunate because God is very active at the very messy edges of life, and especially for our young families that are so busy and their life is so full of chaos, and really their lives are quite messy, that I think the term messy church really speaks to them for where they are. So it gives us God an opportunity to enter into that chaos. Messy Church started actually 8 years ago in a small church in Britain, near Portsmouth. Lucy Moore and her team were observed that although they were right in the middle of an area of growth with lots of young families, they weren't seeing them in church. And they began to sort of explore how they could actually reach out to these young families. And Messy Church is the product of that. Of their prayerful endeavor to bring Christ into the lives of those around them. As I say, it started about 8 years ago in Portsmouth and has just spread into all different denominations, and throughout Britain. They now have over 1,000 Messy churches registered in Britain. There's Messy churches in Denmark and Australia, Canada, the United States, South Africa, many, many places. And it is sort of a growing edge for churches. Um, we have to remember that for most people in our communities, the church is a remote memory. It's two or three generations back, and although for us who are faithful church people, it seems hard to believe, there are many people out there who are not familiar with church at all, and so when we're inviting them in, it really is quite a not an experience that they can even sort of draw back on for that memory. We began at St. George's Messy Church about 5 years ago. We had started a post-baptismal program, and in all my speaking to the families of the baptismal families, I discovered that a lot of them were really interested in church, but it just was not working out in their circumstances. They were completely overburdened, and Sunday was just not working out for them. Sunday is often the day when the family does have time together. That Sunday morning where they get to sort of have a nice relaxed brunch. Saturday is often spent running around doing all kinds of the household stuff, and that Sunday was their day of relaxation. And of course, when we invite people to come to church, what happens to young families? They come into church, the children go into Sunday school, the babies go into the nursery, the parents go into the church, and there's your family time. Um, and so it just wasn't working. And we weren't seeing these baptismal families. I remember being at a church once where we literally had bats in the belfry. And we had tried everything to get rid of them. And finally, someone in jest said, well, maybe we should just go up there and baptize them and we'll never see them again. And I'm sure that that's not an unusual thing to experience in church. So I began looking for a way of providing church to this group of people. And I stumbled upon Lucy Moore's book. Now, I had to order it from Britain at that point. We're lucky now because it's available in Canada. And I ordered Lucy's book, read it through. In Lucy's first book, there is actually 10 messy churches. I did about 5 or 6, and then I thought to myself, hey, I can do this. And it's there we've gone. Let's just answer that next slide. This is our catchphrase for our messy church at St. George's. And it's rather funny, actually, because for my grandchildren, it is their granny's church. As I say, we began it about five years ago. And it's important to know that our messy church is something that evolves. It's not not a set church that you can actually just, sort of plug into and say, oh yeah, here's how I do this, and this. It actually is always something that is always in progress. Your people change, your families change. You might try something that just doesn't work. We started it on a Saturday, and I had actually talked to all the post-baptismal families, and they all felt that Saturday would work. And after about 2 years, it simply wasn't working, and we actually thought at that point that perhaps we would, this just wasn't going to work. So we decided to try it on a different day, and we changed to a Wednesday, and in fact, it's taken off since then. So if you're thinking of doing messy church, I'm going to tell you, don't get discouraged. Keep trying, try different things, because what works well for me is probably not going to work well for you. We're a commuter community. I know that when Lucy does her messy church, she starts off with everybody at an initial gathering. For us, people drift in, and it's a constant sort of. I can always tell when the GO trains come into to Georgetown, because there'll be sort of another group of people that arrive, and sometimes people have other commitments, so they'll come for the first part of messy church and then leave for their second commitment, and so we've got this sort of constant flow of people in and out, and that works very well for us. We've got a system that works for us. But in fact, if you're doing messy church, you might be able to start with a set gathering, because people will arrive when you open your doors. Our messy church at one point had a lot of older children, and that sort of changed the dynamics of how we were doing messy church. At this point in time, our messy church is a lot of toddlers, and again, so then we modify it to reflect sort of that group. Um, we always have to keep it fresh. It always has to have something that's not sort of getting stale and sort of speaks to people, and that can be its own challenge, but it's a great challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about what is messy church and what's not messy church. Messy church is not a program. It is a church service, exactly as one of your Sunday services would be, or if you do a midweek service, it is its own church service, and people need to be aware of that. People need to not be thinking that it's going to be a way of feeding into your Sunday service. That's not to say that people might not decide to come in, make that transition. But if that's what you're thinking of Messy Church as a means of growing your Sunday service, then I would discourage you from thinking that. It is its own service. People come to our Messy Church. They might show up for the Christmas Eve service. They might show up for an Easter service. It always surprises the people that have come only to the Sunday service, and suddenly there's this group of people that will show up and say, "Oh, no, we're not new. St. George's is our church. We go to Messy Church." So there really is that sense of belonging to church, and church is for them Messy Church. And it is a church service. There's praising God, there's singing, there's prayers, and there's fellowship, and there's hearing the good news. They're hearing the message. And is that not basically what we do in church? So it really is a church service. The components that make up Messy Church, and I'm going to sort of expand on this later, but I just want to sort of give you this just a little bit of an overview. People come in, they're greeted at the door. There's usually 5 crafts and a little bit of a challenge that goes on. The crafts vary from sort of a toddler craft to a more challenging craft. That doesn't mean that the toddlers aren't trying the challenging craft, but there's sort of that variety of crafts. For our teenagers, we have a little bit of a challenge, and they really enjoy sort of competing against each other to do this challenge. I get the ideas for the challenge off the website for Win It in a Minute. And they have some really fabulous challenges, and that works out really well because for some reason most of these kids watch that show, and so they're just dying to come in and see what they're going to be trying at Messy Church. And that's what goes on. After about an hour and 15 minutes, we break and we go into the actual worship part. There's some singing, the message is presented, and we do some prayers, and again we finish off with some singing, and we do a grace, and then we go into the meal. Now I see that there is a question here: is the Eucharist part of Messy Church? Some churches, they do a Eucharist as part of the Messy Church. We have not done that. I'm kind of waiting to see if people are going to ask if there's going to be a Eucharist. Our feeling is that the meal takes on that component, oftentimes of sharing in fellowship in a meal, much as Christ shared fellowship with so many of the people that he met in a meal. Which website for the Teen Challenge? It's called Win It in a Minute. I don't know whether you've ever watched the show. I would, if you're thinking of doing that, then I would encourage you to watch the show. They're using household stuff, and you do all kinds of things with it. I can tell you the last one that we did was we had water bottles, and I had a pair of pantyhose, and I put the pantyhose on the head, and in one leg of the pantyhose was a ball, and it was like an elephant's trunk. And so there was these, they sort of stood on either side of a line. The water bottles were sort of parallel, and they had to swing the pantyhose and knocked down the water bottles in less than a minute, and there were like 16 water bottles. There was a lot of laughter and a lot of fun, and moms tried it with their little ones, and they held the little ones and swung the little ones back and forth. So it was a lot of fun. But that's the kind of thing. It's you're not having to do a lot of exciting things, and it's really funny to watch the kids because they'll come in and they'll practice, and then they'll go and get mom or dad, and they'll say, "Oh, I can do it in 30 seconds." Dad takes like 3 minutes, so it's kind of fun. Um, are most people who come baptized? Some are, some aren't, and I know the ones that are baptized. If they're post baptismal people, then I know I've baptized them. But there's people that come that just come with friends who have heard about it in the community and come, and I suspect they are not baptized. Now, we have done several baptisms from Messy Church where after they've come for a year or so and then they've asked if they could be baptized. I have tried to encourage people to do a baptism at Messy Church, but and oftentimes what happens is the family are interested, the people that are coming to Messy Church are interested, but when they take it to the family, no, the family want to have that formal church baptism. So I'm waiting for my first baptism at Messy Church. Um, Yes, I would consider doing a Messy Church baptism. Actually, I've got a family right now that I'm really hoping they're going to go for it. So we'll see how that works out. Okay, I'm going to. Somebody's asked about are the crafts related to a theme of the worship service, and I'm going to talk about that. Yes, they definitely are. So what I'm going to do now is go into the actual sort of unpack now the actual components of Messy Church for you. Okay, Messy Church is messy. Um, you are going to have glue and glitter and paint and sand and water and all kinds of stuff all over the place. Um, it's rather funny because my family always says they know when we've done Messy Church because for 3 days after I sparkle. And I went to my hairdresser about 2 days after Messy Church and he said, "Well, you're very festive," because I still had glitter in my hair and sort of, some of it on my cheeks that it just doesn't seem to be able to scrub off very easily. So it's very messy. And you need to be prepared for that. Um, but there's a lot of fun and a lot of laughter, and there's that joy of God that comes in Messy Church. Um, Now, somebody's asked a question, do you have any guidance around what size of church or community you would start this in? Example, a small rural church. You need to have a committed team, and your team has to be fairly, I want to say fairly large, but I don't mean like 50 people. Um, One of the first messy churches or one of the first messy fiestas, which are workshops for messy church we did, they had 14 people in their church on a Sunday morning. And it was a church that was slowly dying. So they really sort of talked it over and decided that they needed to do something. And so they made a commitment to Messy Church. So each of those 14 people committed to doing Messy Church. They Their first Messy Church, each of the 14 brought a family. And within about 4 or 5 months, they had 50 people routinely at their Messy Church. That's a church of 14 people on a Sunday morning. So if you've got that commitment, you can do it with that small church. But you do need to have that commitment, and people need to understand that they need to be actively part of that. If it's a small church, it's certainly possible. All right. Now, typical Messy Church fashion. My slides have not made the conversion from Mac to PC, so they're kind of messy. Messy Church is all ages. It's not just for children. We have had people that we had an older couple that came. Their family lived far away. They loved to come to Messy Church because they loved seeing the young children, and they would take on that pseudo role of grandma and grandpa, and they would sit at a table and help little ones, help mums or dads with little ones do the cutting or the gluing, and they really, really enjoyed that fellowship. So don't think that it's just for young families. It isn't, it's all ages, and it's family oriented. You really are encouraging families to come together and be that um, be in church together. And we have mums, dads that come. We have mums and grandmas. We have grandpas that come and bring their grandchildren. So there really is that sort of nice spread across the ages. Um, Hospitality is very, very important at Messy Church. So we have at the door a greeter. And the greeter's job is to literally sort of welcome people to Messy Church, help them to get a name tag. There's usually a healthy snack right there, and people are always encouraged to come back and just, nibble on that snack. Supper's a bit later for children, and they're hungry, and sort of that welcoming of a healthy snack at the door is a very welcoming thing to do. If it's a new family, then they are encouraged to they're told sort of how Messy Church works and invited to enter into that mess. And at each of our tables, our craft tables, there's someone there to sort of explain the craft and to help it. So hospitality is really begins right at the door, and the theme is posted right at the door, the theme of whatever or the Messy Church is. And the other thing that we do is, because we're sort of bringing in that idea that church is a family, the greeter also takes note of anybody who's had a birthday from the previous month, and that's posted on a board. And then at supper we sing happy birthday, which is exciting. That's just a brief description for the greeter. I usually set that right on the table so that each greeter has an idea of to make sure that they're catching all the little bits and pieces. Creating. Now this is our crafts, and every craft will tie into the particular theme. We did a message. Our last Messy Church was, we looked at where Jesus prepared breakfast on the beach after his resurrection, and spoke to Peter and said, "Feed my sheep." So our crafts really centered around fish, because he made barbecued fish and bread, and sheep. So we did sheep, and then sort of a beach idea. At each table there is sort of the craft, how to do the craft, and then there's a little bit of an encouragement about what to talk about. That's for the people, the table leaders, to kind of encourage a conversation around how that craft ties into the theme. So, and I have an example here too, but if with I'm thinking of the theme where we had the Jesus at the beach and talking about sheep, and it was about, the shepherd's job is to tend the sheep, make sure the sheep are well fed and well cared for, and how have you experienced that in your life? How have you experienced being cared for? And that conversation is encouraged. But I also tell my table leaders that sometimes the conversation at the table is about bitching about their day. And if that's what needs to happen, then that's what needs to happen. So although there is a way, a talk that they're encouraged to for the people to explore, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not set in stone, and the conversation is to go where the conversation is going to go. The other thing about creating and doing crafts is that when people are busy with their hands, there's often that freedom of conversation. There's not a lot of eye contact, and so people can sort of enter into conversations comfortably, because they're also sort of doing other things at the same time. And it's fun, and it encourages community, because you will often see a child working with someone who's not a member of their family, because someone stayed behind just to help them glue or whatever, and so you get that sense of community happening. and you get sort of friendships happening from messy church. Um, I find, and one of the questions here is, what crafts, games, etc., do the adults do if they are not with the child? Um, I often find that they will be helping another child. So they will be they're helping a child or um, participating in the games themselves because they're just interested in that little bit of competition. So they and some of the crafts are definitely adult. I've had someone come in and teach how to make earrings. I make sure the young girls in the congregation know about that because that's usually a very popular thing for them to do. We've done leather tooling, and again, and those kinds of things are things that adults enjoy doing too. Um, does the service require planning and how much? It does require a fair amount of planning. Um, just researching your crafts, researching how you're going to do your message. It is a bit labor intensive, and then teams sort of help put things together. Um, I'm certainly a lot faster at it now than I was, and I'm not entirely sure I can give you a figure on that because it tends to be one of those things that I pick up and put down and pick up and put down throughout the from one messy church to the next. Um, so I don't think I can actually tell you. We usually do 5 crafts and um, one activity or one challenge table for each messy church. I'm just going to pull up here some of these are some slides from our different messy churches. And you can see sort of there's young families, there's grandmas in that picture. The children are sort of involved in different things. Um, the yeah, and it's the other interesting thing that happens at Messy Church is, and I've noticed this has come up a few times in the Messy Church workshops that we've done. A lot of the young dads are watching other young dads and they're observing how they're reacting with their children. So the dads are kind of learning about being dads. A lot of these young fellows, and it's a very interesting phenomenon to watch. So there's a little bit of sort of learning about parenting that goes on as well as as the worship part of it as well. Um, we offer Messy Church once a month. Most Messy Churches are offered once a month because it's more labor intensive. Once a month is enough, and we have to remember that once a month is considered to be regular church attendance anymore. Um, we do have a church school. One of the questions is, do we have a church school? And we do have a church school, and but we also offer Messy Church, so we do have both available. We have at our Messy Church, we're averaging around 40 at our Messy Church at this point in time, and it fluctuates. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. So it really, and it's not unusual to have, sort of 50 people at a Messy Church. I think a lot of Messy Churches find that about 50 people, they're actually beginning to max out at 50 people, and certainly 50 people is about all our space can handle too. And as we sort of grow and begin to approach that 50, we've actually talked about doing 2 Messy Churches in a month, but we're not to that point yet. Um, Tell you more about our challenge table. Sure. It's as I say, we do different things. It's I get the ideas off the Win It in a Minute site. It's that's the table that the sort of preteens and teens gather around. They really enjoy challenging each other with it. Now that doesn't it will minimally tie into the theme, and there doesn't tend to be a theological discussion at that table, but then they're there for the worship part, and they will. If I have a lot of young kids, and we'll get into that in a minute, I will often get them to be involved in presenting the worship. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's an example of what would be sitting on each table. It tells you what you need to do. And when I'm setting up Messy Church, that little part at the beginning tells me exactly what I need to put on that table, which saves a lot of organization time. And then how to do that Messy Church. And then there's that little bit about the talking about and encouraging that conversation. And that again is it's a suggestion, but the conversation needs to go where the conversation is going to go for that particular table. The worship. It's really important that we remember that we're working with both churched and unchurched people. People don't know the hymns. And there's a great many people that don't know the Lord's Prayer. And so if you're going to be using words like redemption and salvation, these words just aren't in their vocabulary. So yes, I do talk about redemption and salvation, but I unpack those terms. I take them down to the level of what they really mean. So I'm not just going to say, well, salvation is through Jesus Christ, because they're not going to understand what salvation is. But I can understand what Christ. I can explain to them what the meaning that Christ has, that in coming down to be fully human and fully divine, and what that means in our lives, and what that means for each individual person. And so salvation is talked about, but not necessarily using that sort of particular word and assuming that people are going to know what I'm talking about. It's really important with prayer that people begin to understand that prayer is a conversation with God, and oftentimes we do communal prayer, and we forget that there's that other aspect of prayer where people really need to be sort of engaged with God. And people have this funny idea about prayer that it has to be, really sort of formal language, and can only be done in really formal places. And so one of the things that I really try and encourage at Messy Church is that people begin to understand that prayer is simple as a conversation, and that with any of our relationships, any of our close relationships, if we never speak together, if we never talk to each other about our feelings and our hopes and our worries and our concerns, and how life is treating us, then how can we possibly form a relationship? And it's the same with God. We need to engage with God, and it's something that people have. I think it's a revelation to a lot of people that this is what goes on. I've said to people that, have you ever got up in the morning and taken a walk, and there's the sun coming up, and it's filtering through the trees, and it's absolutely perfect. And that's God speaking to you. God is saying to you, I've made this this sunrise just for you. This beauty, this place, you're the only person in it, and so this is my gift to you. And your response to that is, wow, this is great. Thanks, God. That idea that there's that close a relationship, and that's one of the things that I try and sort of get across at Messy Church. It's important that when we're telling our stories, that they make sense to people. If we're going to tell the story of the Good Samaritan, it's not going to make sense to people. They're not going to understand what a Samaritan was. They're not going to understand all of the nuances of that story. But if I take that story and I take it and make it relevant to people's lives, so if I tell that story of someone walking by the pub, and he gets two thugs jump out and beat him up and take his wallet, and along comes the assistant to the mayor and says, "Oh, this town's really falling apart," and just walks away, and maybe the chaplain at the hospital walks by and says, "Oh, this this just isn't right. We shouldn't be having these drunks on our main street." And then along comes the punk rocker with the weird hair, and stops by, and gets out his cell phone and calls 911 and stays with the guy. It's getting that idea across. It's relevant to people, and they begin to understand and then what the story of that good Samaritan is about, and it becomes something that they can engage with in their lives. So that's one of the stories. Now, when I'm doing worship, I kind of keep these three things in mind. Um, be flexible. You might have something in mind, and it might go totally different than you had expected. Sometimes I've got something prepared, and I'll have the older children come up to me and say, "We really want to be part of the message tonight. Can we do that?" So about 10 minutes before we are going to do the message, I'll sit down. I'll talk to them. We'll talk about the story, and they'll take off with it. So, sometimes they'll ask me to be a part of it, but sometimes they're just going to do it. And the first few times that happened, it was a real nail biter because I had no idea how this was going to work out. And I just had to step back and let the Holy Spirit do what the Holy Spirit was going to do. And honestly, I have been absolutely amazed. I remember we did the story of Noah, and they didn't want me. They said, "No, no, we're going to do this." So off they went. They planned the whole thing. And I remember a young fellow, he was about 12 or 13. He was taking the part of God, and he stood on a chair, and he said, "Noah," and really had that idea. And then at one point, he sort of looked down at all of the people, and he said, "Oh, these people are driving me crazy." And I thought, "Oh, he's really picked up. He's really got that idea of what the story of Noah was about." We did another one where we did Joseph, and again they sort of ran with the story, and I had a big box. So when Joseph was to be thrown into the well, the kid climbed in the box, and then along came the Ishmaelites to take Joseph off into slavery, and he wouldn't get out of the box. So the kids are looking at me and they're going, "Get out of the box!" And this kid saying, "No, I like it in here." "Oh, get out of the box!" "No, I like it in here." And they're looking at me. I said, "Push the box over." So they pushed the box over, and two of the Ishmaelites took him by one foot, one by the other, and they literally dragged him off. And this kid is crying, "I don't want to go. I want to stay in the box." Well, there's your story of Joseph. So again, sort of make room for the Spirit, and let happen what's going to happen. I like to mix it up. I have done little film clips where we've talked about things. I have done where we've sort of, I've done it as a story where we sat around and like a campfire, and told a story. As I said, I've had the kids sort of ask and then present the story. I've done things like it's called a story bag, and it's sort of done with not exactly puppets, but little sort of people, and again, sort of unfolding the story. So by mixing it up, by making it different, it sort of always is fresh. And again, have fun. The last one that I did, and we were talking, and I had a 3-year-old, and she sat in the front row. Now her mom was back sort of feeding the baby, and she was there by herself, and she'd come and sat in the front row. And during the whole talk, she kept asking questions, and they were really, really good questions. Like, well, why does God call us sheep? And well, what did the shepherd do? And it was just, I could hardly get the story out, but because she was asking me questions before I could even get to what I wanted to say. So again, it's good. I'm just going to answer a few questions here. How do you publicize our messy church? We have done a media release, talked about it. It's on our website. We do sort of mouth to mouth stuff, or mouth, person to person stuff, word of mouth. Um, and yeah, a lot of our messy church just becomes because people bring people with them, and that seems to really help. Um, Having we have a Facebook page for Messy Church at St. George's, and sort of word gets out through that as well. We're on the Facebook website for Messy Church Canada, and again, that sort of helps. So that's sort of as some of the publicizing that we have done. Messy Church lasts 2 hours. For us, it lasts from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and I I'm very firm about trying to get people, making sure that people are gone by 7 o'clock, so that kids have to go to bed. Other things are going on. Do you ever have youth at stations helping with crafts? Yes, yes, I do. And I'm always willing to take help no matter what. How long is the message? We keep it about probably 10 to 15 minutes. So we usually finish the crafts about 6:15, and the message is from 6:15 to 6:30. Um, it's and the question is it geared more to the kids or to the adults? I think many of us find that people take more away from the children's talk on a Sunday morning than they do from the sermon. So it it's geared to engage children, but I from the conversations that I have afterwards with adults, I'm going to say that they're engaged. No worries there. Um, how do we help folks to understand that it is okay to talk about your faith? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on when we talk about teams. So what I'm going to go on, what I'm going to do is to go on now, and this is our nativity. And what we did was we had people come in, and we literally sort of planned it and did it on that messy church night. When have you ever seen a Christmas pageant where the kids were having a really good time? And they sort of, I had sort of like a tickle trunk, and they pulled out their costumes and they decided who was going to do what, and they had a really great time. This year we did something very similar, only we filmed it, so each family got to take home a DVD of Messy Church with their child in it, which was well received. Okay. Songs. Oh, we have tried all different kinds of ways of doing songs because you can't do hymns because they don't know them. We tried initially doing contemporary music, and that just didn't work because they only come once a month, so it's difficult for them to learn songs. And because they're all sort of fresh, it's there's not sort of a group that can carry it. We certainly don't have a choir. So we tried doing. I tried using the VBS songs, the videos from the VBS program. Didn't work. So finally, I tried using piggyback songs. It's an old tune. I've been working on the railroad and then putting words to it. Now they tell me that there's an actual book out there that has the piggyback songs. It's something that I actually enjoy doing, so I usually write my songs myself. And finally, after 5 years in Messy Church, we actually have people singing. So that's what we're going with at this point in time. Doesn't mean it's not going to change, but at this point, it's working, and I'm going to stick with that. Okay. Now, these are prayers, and I usually have the prayers sort of tie into the theme. So I will often ask people to think about how God is in their life, something that where God is being a presence in their life, and they can understand that the good things that are happening are gifts from God. And so part of the prayer then for them will be to thank God for that. And then the second part of that will be for them to think of a way that is keeping them from being in relationship with other people or with God, and how they would like to restore relationship with others, and ask God's help for that, and how they would like to restore relationship with God, and to ask God's help for that. Um, this particular picture came from last Easter. uh, I had them actually, and for once they had to actually work through the tables in a set sequence, and we actually worked through the Easter week. So we started by making palm leaves for the triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and then we went from station to station until we ended up making resurrection rolls at the last station. And I was at the table where they were making teardrops. It was a crucifixion of Jesus. And so they were given a ribbon and two pieces of shrinker plastic, or shrinky dink it's called. And on one on one of the tiers, they were to write the name of someone or something that they felt that um, they had hurt, or a situation or a relationship that they had harmed, and on the second tier they were to write, "I am forgiven." They were to reflect on that, think about how they could make amends, and then write, "I am forgiven." And then the two tiers were connected by a ribbon. It was extremely interesting because a mom and her daughter came, and I explained what the table was about. And then she said, "Just a minute." And I heard her go back about two tables with the dad, who was with another, with the son. And she said to him, "You need to be at this table." So off he comes, and so I explained to what we were to doing. And then she sort of progressed on with the two children, and he kind of sat there. So people were coming and going and coming and going. And I sort of said to him, this is only between you and God. So you don't need to write anything on there, um, or you can just make a symbol if you want, but it has nothing to do with anyone else but you and God. And after a little bit, he wrote something on, and then he went on to the next table, and his tears are on that cross. So there's an opportunity to really have people have a deep spiritual experience at Messy Church. And Messy Church ends with supper. It's a nutritious supper. It's what you would serve your family. And again, we need to remember that much of Christ's fellowship occurred around the table. It's an opportunity for people to enter into relationship. Um, it's God-centered community sharing a meal. There's often conversations that occur afterwards. I often will sit around, and I'll hear people sort of talking about the message, or talking about their Christian journey a little bit. There's an opportunity for them to come and talk to some of the table leaders, and you will see people actually make an effort to come and sit by someone because they want to sort of engage in conversation. And it's also a time of great sort of enjoyment. So, all right. Before we get into this, I want to talk a little bit about your teams. I do have some of that on the handout. Um, your teams, when you're setting up Messy Church, it's very helpful to have somebody who's crafty. Um, there's all kinds of craft sites out there on the internet. You just sort of type in craft, and the whatever biblical story you're working on, and all kinds of stuff will come up. But it helps if you've got somebody who sort of has an interest in that. So that's one thing that is very helpful, that you need, is that crafty person. You need to have somebody who's good kitchen leader, and believe me, that's a skill. So somebody that's in that kitchen that can organize that team, keep them on time, know how to sort of get the meal out at the right time. And I always call her my kitchen dragon because she's got to make sure that nobody's just wandering in there, that it's just the kitchen team that's in there. And so that's sort of another important member of your team. You need to have somebody that can, as a good storyteller when they're doing the talk. And that, being a priest, I can say that that sometimes is not the the minister. Being able to do a sermon and being able to tell a story are not necessarily the same skill. So if you've got somebody that's a good storyteller that can engage people, that's very helpful too. So that's sort of another sort of person that you would need to have in your team. How I work my teams are I make up all the messy church dates and I email it to the team and say, can you be in there to put in the time, the days that they are available. So I'm not asking my messy church people to be available for every single messy church. I am asking them to sign up for the ones that they can be available for. And that makes it easier for them too, because they're not making a commitment every month. Um, One of the things that another really important aspect of messy church is that not only are you reaching people who are in church, and not only are you providing another way of another church service for young families, but you are also training disciples from within your congregation. um, I, Anglicans are not really, you say evangelism and they sort of go, ooh. Um, but we meet about 2 days before messy church. We sort of read over the biblical passage. We talk about sort of the theme. We look at any questions. We discuss things. I give them an opportunity to look at sort of what the craft tables are, what the discussion suggestions are. They pick the table that they want to be involved with, and they then feel comfortable. Because one of my big learnings was that I assumed that longstanding parishioners actually sort of knew the stories, and I was surprised to find that they were uncomfortable with it, and a lot of times they did feel comfortable discussing it. So this has really sort of improved their ability to enter into discussion and to be comfortable with that. Um, all right, so when I started Messy Church, this is the only book I had available to me. And if that's all if that's all you've got available to you, then you can actually you can work with that book and start a Messy Church. Sue Cowflesh, the Messy Church coordinator for Eastern Canada, and I do workshops, and we are more than interested in coming and doing a workshop for you. Now, I'm not so sure we'd be going to British Columbia or PEI, but you can contact us. There's on the Messy Church Canada Facebook page. You can contact Sue and talk to her about that. And we will be welcome. We would be love to come and do a workshop. There's the Messy Church from Britain. And they've got lots of really good ideas there, and again, they're willing to sort of provide you with some information too. So there are people out there. If you're thinking about starting a workshop and you can't make it to or if you're thinking about starting a Messy Church and you can't make it to a workshop, Sue and I are always available online to help you through that and to give you some help with that. So you're not out there sort of on your own. I'm going to just look at a few more of these questions here. How do we help folks to understand that it's okay to talk about your faith? Well, as I said, that's one of the things that I do. I meet with my table leader teams to make sure that they can understand it. And I also sort of make sure to tell them that much as the disciples were told in the Bible, that God will give them the words that they need. They need to be faithful and to enter into the process as much as they can, but that God will help them and give them the words. The Spirit is within them, and if all else fails, they're more than welcome to send them on to myself or the other priest here, Rob, and we can help them too. So And people are quite comfortable with that, knowing that there's backup and that they've had a chance to explore the theme themselves. Um, a general overview of the worship format, time, length, adult involvement. I think we've talked about that. As a 2 hour involvement, and there is adult involvement for both the preparation, and young people are also encouraged to be a part of the team. Um, no, we don't have worship. The question is it important to have worship in the sanctuary? No, we don't have worship in the sanctuary. All our worship is done in the hall. Some messy churches do have their worship in the sanctuary. I know Lucy Moore does. Their church is very chopped up, so they don't have that open space to do it. So their most open, their largest space is their worship space. For us, we have a big hall, so we do it all in the hall. Um, and so, but again, it's up to you. It's what your people are comfortable with, and yeah. There is a film clip on YouTube of our messy church, and it's St. George's. It's at St. George's Messy Church, um, and that was done about 3 years ago at this point. So it's a bit different, but it is a good film clip. And Lucy Moore's film clip of the Messy Church at her church in England is available too. Have you ever had the meal first? No. And I've learned from other people that that's not a good way to do it, because what happens is people eat and leave. So if you provide the meal at the end, then they stick around for the worship. Um, and so that's been the learning from other places, that no, don't do the meal first. Um, and if you get Lucy's book, yes, it's very English. So no, we don't do bangers and mash. We have um, we've done tacos and fish and chips. We often make the meal sort of come part of the. Oh, I'm almost out of time. We make the meal part of it. And I mean, we did Moses, the Israelites in the desert, and it was manna, and they had manna and quail, and so the team just sat around, and there was nothing in the kitchen. There was no food cooking. The team were just sitting around in the kitchen, and sort of all these good smells that normally was part of Messy Church just weren't there, and so they're kind of all looking and wondering what's going on. And while we were doing worship, we ran out and got cooked chickens and crusty bread from the superstore. So miraculously, after worship appeared quail and manna. So you can be really quite creative. We did our Noah. We had fish and chips. Seemed like a natural thing. When we did Jesus the Good Shepherd, we had shepherd's pie. So again, it's kind of fun to sort of or make the meal represent or part of what the theme is too. Um, Yes, I do have pictures on the Facebook page, and I always have my parents sign releases for those. So, yes, there are pictures. There's pictures on the St. George's website, actually. Um, I put a basket out for donations, and people can have the opportunity to make a donation and put it in an envelope and get a tax receipt for it. We have people actually from Messy Church who have asked for envelopes, which was a real thing. It took us about 2.5 years before the donations actually equaled the cost of doing a Messy Church. And but now Messy Church brings into 2 to 3 times exceed the cost of actually putting on our Messy Church. Do you use godly play? One of the things that I do sort of is resembles a godly play, but it isn't exactly godly play. Um, I guess I must be too much of a type A person, because I find godly play, I have difficulty with that. I get too antsy during godly play. But I do something that is sort of a modified thing with godly play. And if that works for you, then definitely go for it. What does it cost? Um, I'm a scrounger, so I keep my craft costs really down. I can usually do 5 crafts for less than $1 a person. But I mean, you should see. You should see my space. It's full of bits and pieces that I've just collected along the way. Um, so I usually do a messy church for planning on 40 to 45 people, and it costs me for food and crafts around $60. Sometimes donations come in. Sometimes the messy church people themselves will say, "Oh, I think I'd like to bring the dessert next month." I say, "Oh, okay, that's great." I remember the dads that decided they wanted a chili off, so I had about two or three of the dads say, "Oh, we'll bring chili and we'll bring chili and we'll bring chili." So we had a chili off, and again that sort of cuts down the cost too. So you can do it at a reasonable rate, and don't be afraid to ask your parishioners for it. If you need wool, I have enough wool that I can actually put it in my will because I will never use all the wool I've got. Are we running out of time? I know we're over.
Well, we
Are
are at
there,
nine
have I answered
o'clock,
most people's questions?
and and I am
Oh,
very impressed that
I
we
tried to
had
answer the
quite a
questions
pile
to
of
the full.
questions. Mm. So
I
thank you
think I got
very,
through
very
most of the
much, Nancy.
questions. Is there any? Oh, no problem. Are there any? If there's any other outstanding questions, I think I've got them. Okay, good. So if again, both Sue, Calflesh, and myself are available on the Facebook Messy Church Facebook Messy Church Canada Facebook page. If you have any further questions or if you need any help setting up your Messy Church, we would love to be able to do that for you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I'm wondering, you mentioned that we can get in touch with you and Sue. Could you provide an address that we can contact you at? I will type it into the chat pod here.
I think it's just the Facebook Messy Church Canada. If you go on Facebook and put Messy Church Canada, that should bring you to our Facebook page. Sue's in the process of developing a website, so I'm sure that that will, as soon as that becomes available, then that will, we'll make that available to people too.
Okay. I will just provide, in case folks don't have Facebook, I'll put the Edge address here, and perhaps if they need to try to contact you
Okay.
another way, they can email that, and we'll try to connect you. So thank you again, and I will put up the handouts again for those that didn't have a chance to upload this, so I'm going to reblock the PowerPoint presentations. So if you haven't had an opportunity to upload the two handouts that reference a lot of what Nancy said tonight and some more detail and the greeter job description and what is involved in some of the teams and so on, it's all in these two handouts, as well as perhaps that book that you referenced by Lucy Moore that could be helpful.
That's very helpful. Mm-hmm.
And again, if you know of someone that wasn't able to participate tonight, there will be a recorded version available, and that should be up within the next week or so. And we do invite you to my mind has gone blank for a moment, end of a long day, to fill out our feedback form, and I will send you the link to that after the webinar is finished. And please do stay posted. We do have a lineup of webinars coming up. They aren't available yet, publicized on the website, but do keep an eye out for those.
You're
And again,
welcome.
Nancy, thank
My
you very
pleasure.
much for joining us tonight, and hope that we have certainly have lots to think about. I know a few people here are involved in their own projects, so I hope that